Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disciple Hour, episode 17. I am Northern Westman, and I'm joined by Gentile Gentleman and Ian. Say hello, Phyllis.
Hi, this is Ian.
Hello, everyone. This is the Gentile.
Today's topic is the Israel-Hamas conflict. So on October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a massive terrorist attack on the state of Israel from the Gaza Strip. Hundreds were murdered, raped, and mutilated, and Israel responded with airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. In this episode, we want to talk about the fallout on Westernkind due to all of this. The anti-white narrative dominates all discussion about this issue. And I have a few points that we will discuss, such as, number one, Palestinian marches are going to be banned in France. Number two, Britain is going to ban flying Palestinian flags and singing songs. They will also ban certain chants. Let me just give you a clue. From the River Jordan to the Mediterranean, a state will be free. And they will also ban white negative symbols because you have to paint an evil image of white people, right? Number three, the Anti-White Defamation League sent out a tweet steering the attention towards quote-unquote white supremacists, an anti-white slur. And number four, we are deeply concerned about how white people will feel the fallout of this war. We can expect anti-white Arabs to flood into the West at this point, as a result of this war, that is, and we can expect a wave of terrorism in the West as a result. And number five, a potential war with Iran. And of course, we'll do freestyle from there. But let's go over to points 1 and 2. So a little backstory. As a result of these attacks, many Arabs and actually many non-whites, they cheered for these horrific murders in Israel. And as a result, the Judeans noticed that there was a wave of hatred towards them in the West, not by white people, but by guess whom. And I've seen images and video footages of these pro attackers, these marches, and there are very few white faces in the crowds. I played a game, Count the White People, and I could count 2 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 in a crowd of hundreds. And as a result, France and Britain are going to ban marches, and Britain is going to ban the Palestinian flag and the singing of songs, and also this chant, which I can see why someone might consider it to be highly offensive. I mean, if you just look at a map of the Kingdom of Israel, you'll see why. From Jordan to the Mediterranean. Yeah. And so just briefly here, we have seen in the past attacks on white people, the destruction of Western civilization, and the anti-white regime has been totally silent, calling it mostly peaceful protests, or that this is a part of our values, we have to allow this is their freedom of expression, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as two non-white groups clash together, then they step in. Then they will ban either side, right? And so it just proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are living under an anti-white regime. And then there's the anti-white defamation league. They tweeted something about anti-white slur leaders are openly celebrating the attackers' attack on the Kingdom of Israel, on Judea, cheering explicit depictions of gross attacks against the Judeans and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, I don't want to read this. The eras against the door. Now, of course, the anti-whites over at the ADL will paint white people as the evil ones here. They're steering the attention towards white people, always inside the anti-white narrative. Even though we have seen many anti-white non-whites supporting this violence because they see no difference between the Judeans and Westernkind. I even saw one tweet saying, "What did you think decolonization would look like?" and calling us losers for thinking that it would be peaceful. And so there, it's stated inside the anti-white narrative, oh, the colonialists and the oppressors are here oppressing the poor non-whites in the Gaza. They see these low IQ anti-whites, they see no difference between the Judeans and Westmen. And so for that reason, we are deeply concerned about how white people will feel the fallout of this war. And we can expect anti-white, non-whites to simply seek revenge on our people all across the West, in the United States, in Europe, all the way to Australia. And then there is the grave potential for a war with Iran. And it's very interesting. Something that you, Gentile, you told me. I had not thought of it. 3 days before this attack, the Egyptian Secret Service warned the Israelis about this attack. Refresh my memory a bit, Gentle. So 3 days before, and then a day before the attacks, the United States just unfreezed like billions of dollars to the Iranian regime, correct? And then this happens.
Yeah,
And then
if you look at the news reports that came out, this whole narrative was prepped and ready to go. As soon as these attacks happened, you had people on the news saying that Iran is funding this, they're paying for it, and they immediately referenced money that was released by the United States that had been frozen for a few years. This money had been kept from Iran for quite a while. And it coincidentally was unfrozen the day before or 2 days before this attack happened. I mean, just immediately in time for it to happen, it was unfrozen. And then as soon as the attack happened, everyone in the media in lockstep was claiming like, oh, see, we unfroze the money and Iran immediately gave it to Palestine. And this is what happens, as if you can get money in 24 hours and buy a bunch of paragliders and rockets and get it all shipped and processed and built in 24 hours. But the narrative was ready to go, and every network said the exact same narrative. So it really does reek of planning, of pre-planning. It wasn't like people, in a couple of days stumbled upon this information and came to this conclusion. It was just fired right off the bat. I mean, it was an immediate talking point, which is pretty suspect. So yeah, it's quite coincidental that this money was held for a couple years and it was immediately released just in time for this narrative to be spun.
Right. And it is not surprising because we know that these neocons have been wanting a war with Iran for a long time. And now they have the moral high ground. They can blame Iran for these attacks, and then they can prep America for a war against Iran. And I'm not joking, I've been praying to God to steer off a war with Iran, to work his miracles, because a war with Iran, it would mean thousands of US soldiers would die, untold amounts of injuries and PTSDs and ruined families and drug overdoses and people going homeless in the US as a result, like veterans. And the cost, I mean, all those billions of dollars are going to end up in the war effort, and that's going to leave you with an even worse infrastructure. It's already bad, but it's going to get even worse. And it's going to affect white people disproportionately. And so, yeah, I'm really afraid of a war with Iran. But then there's also the potential of millions of refugees going from Gaza to the West. We are talking about 2.5 million people, and half of them are children. Can you imagine? And they've been living under a terrorist regime by Hamas for 18 years. Can you imagine growing up under a terrorist regime? You are not going to function anywhere. And they're going to be flooded into our countries. And our people are going to suffer as a result. So that's what I'm afraid of. And I'm also angry over it. I'm very angry about it. This is a war between two non-white groups. This is a land dispute between two non-white groups, and our people, Westernkind, white people, are going to suffer because of it. And you're seeing the event horizon coming closer and closer. It's all drawing closer. Only tyranny can keep these two groups at peace within our countries. And that's what the event horizon is. If we do not recapture our destiny before the event horizon, then we will cease to exist as a people. And so this war really affects our people. This could be the end of our people.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. Sorry. I was just going to say, like, I mean, a lot of white people, unfortunately, are very complacent. They feel secure, and, they're still used to Western norms and Western individualism, but they really don't seem to comprehend how people of a different biospirit, settle disputes, how they tend to think more collectively than we do. They tend to think, if my group and Group X are in conflict, then any member of Group X is fair game. Any member of Group X can be victimized, and that's completely morally legitimate. So, if we bring any non-white group to the West, they're going to view white people as the enemies, and even people who think, well, I didn't do anything, I didn't fight wars, I didn't support this, but you'll still be in the crosshairs because they see you as part of the enemy tribe, and that's that may seem primitive to some people listening to this, but that's really how a lot of people think. So, we already live under an anti-white regime. We already live under a system that intellectually, justifies the harm of white people, that has set the narrative that white people are bad and are fair targets in any conflict. So, bring in more people who naturally think that way is going to lead to, atrocities. Like, that's just a fact. And the people who facilitate these things, the people in government who support these things, who encourage these things, they're trying to harm you. They're trying to harm your family. They're putting you in harm's way by doing this. So we really need to understand that this conflict that's happening, it needs to be contained there as much as possible, and that we should not be getting into wars. We should not be fighting it for them. We need to stop picking sides in it, because all that does is anger one group or another. And those people don't see this as an intellectual debate. They see it as something that is part of the very core of who they are and their identity. So either side of this conflict, because they are.
You're cutting out. You're cutting out, but I agree. But we should always frame this, from our perspective, in our story. How is this affecting our people? Like you said, these people are very collective, and our people, sadly, are not collective at all. And our people, our biospirit is very individualistic. And we need a people to solve this. But Gentle, so you're going to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was definitely going to agree with Ian that, we have to understand that, Westernkind, people in the West, we have a certain understanding of honor and right and wrong, and we have this urge to want to help people, especially in the day of the internet, where you can see the suffering of a person all the way on the other side of the planet. It is very tempting for us to think that we should meddle in every little injustice in the world. And we do really have to step away from this kind of thinking, because even though it's good to want to help people, constantly interfering in conflicts in other places makes it our conflict, and it really shouldn't be. And I know exactly how people are going to want to hear this question played out, especially in the United States and even in the greater part of Europe, because their media sounds exactly like our media right now. It's very interesting that the only time the European and the American media sound identical is when they have a shared goal. And you can see that right now. The newscasters in England and France and other countries, they're identical in how they're covering this issue. And so there are a couple of questions that most listeners are going to want to hear. And these questions are: do the Palestinians have a right to some form of a homeland of their own and their own space that they can be in charge of and live as a people without someone else meddling or controlling them? And the answer, of course, is yes, they do. Now, the difficulty is they can't agree on what that state or which area this should be. There's just argument over the details. Um, and then the other question they're going to want to know is the state of Israel legitimate, and do they have a right to defend themselves? Now, the right of kings, the a heavenly right of kings and princes, nations, and the right of conquest has been recognized from the beginning of time. So regardless of how the nation of Israel, as they call it, um, and no matter how it started, do they as a people have a right to defend themselves, just like you and I have a right to defend ourselves? And the answer is yes, they do. What we're talking about here is different, though. What we're talking about here is a small strip of people that are completely contained. They're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to, no one's allowed in. They can't put boats into the water. There's a naval blockade. They don't provide their own power. They don't provide their own food. They don't provide their own water. They don't provide their own anything. They really don't even have an economy, with the exception of, people who vend everyday goods that you need to survive that are brought in to this area by Israel. Whether it comes from another country or not, it all goes through Israeli customs. So these people are under the complete authority of Israel, like it's a state that's part of this nation of Israel, but they don't have any say in anything that happens to them, and they don't have any autonomy. And people of the West really have to understand that we wouldn't tolerate this. And so it's understandable that these people don't want to tolerate this. What we should be coming a place that we should be coming from is, how can we give these people autonomy and avoid this conflict? Not this beating of the war drums that the Western media has really started to push in front of us. Like, nope, they have to either leave or they have to be annihilated. There's only one solution, and that's complete obliteration. They're offering us one solution and one solution only. And if you don't pick that solution, it's because you hate the Jews, or you want to see Israel destroyed, or, they make this false equivalency that if you want a peaceful solution, you therefore hate the other member, in this conflict. And so people really have to stand up to that, because it's an anti-white position. And let's go into detail of how it's anti-white. Biden just yesterday went on public record saying that he is going to work to import hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to the United States. And so if they can get it to happen, they're going to. This is the only peaceful solution they're offering. Is like, oh, well, if you want them to not be destroyed, then you've got to take them into your country. So let's look at this offer from what they're really saying. What they're saying is, we can't live with them. We hate them. They're horrible neighbors. They just want to kill our children, murder our babies. They want to do all this stuff, right? So you should make them your neighbors. That's their offer. And that's truly heinous. On the one hand, they're the worst people on the planet. And the state of Israel, Judeans, should have the right to just completely destroy them. And anyone who questions that is a horrible person. But the only peaceful solution they offer is, you take them into your nation and you live next to them. Which, if they truly believe these people were as terrible as they are, why would they tell us that we should live next to them? So you can see the disconnect in the choices they're presenting to the West, and both of them are anti-white. If Israel takes military weapons from Europe and the United States and uses it to destroy these people, we get blamed for it. If we don't want these people to die, the only option is to bring them into our nations and to further white erase ourselves, and to bring more people in who will support the anti-white narrative and who will make an enclave that's separate from our nations and further divide and ruin our nations. So we have no choice but to accept an outcome that's bad for us, when that does not have to be the case. And those are big questions that people need to hear from us. We're not taking a side saying, we don't like the nation of Israel, we don't like Judeans, so therefore, support Palestine. I'm not saying support Palestine in any real sense. And I'm not saying be antithetical to Judeans in any real sense. What I'm saying is that this is a conflict between two people that are not Western, and that if we can push for a peaceful solution that leads to less death and does not lead to the destruction of our nations, we should be pushing it, because that should be the view that we have. And no one can say that that's evil of us. And some of the other things that we probably should talk about is propaganda. Something we've really been hearing a lot about is that there have been dozens and dozens of babies that have been murdered. And there's been no evidence of this. Even Ben Shapiro posted a tweet the other day that was supposedly a picture of a charred up baby laying on a blanket that he later deleted, because the internet was able to find the real image and show that it was actually a dog that was edited over to make it look like there was a charred lump of something in the place of where the dog was laying on this blanket. And so he deleted the tweet. So even someone like Ben Shapiro, who has direct contact, with the leadership of one of the nations involved in this conflict, is either accidentally, intentionally, I'm not making any claim, but even he is sharing false information, whether it's accidental or not. So there is a lot of false information out there. And we have to remember instances such as the Naira testimony, Naira being Nayrah. In 1990, a girl only identified as Naira testified in front of the United States Congress saying that Iraqi soldiers had taken babies out of incubators and left them to die on hospital floors. And this was repeated by the President Bush at the time, by hundreds of Congress people. It was a way to get the United States public to be comfortable with getting involved in the first Gulf War. And this turned out to be completely false. This girl was actually a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. She was the daughter of the American ambassador from Kuwait to the United States. But it was too late. The damage had been done. So this claim of baby killing is something that we've seen over and over again when these Middle Eastern conflicts pop up. And there may very well be children that are dying, but children are dying in this area all the time. And that does not mean we should go over there and blow up, destroy, send thousands of troops. It is not justification for that. So people really have to put that in perspective and check their emotional response to some of this information that's coming out that we haven't even verified.
That's excellent.
And I'm sorry, I know that was really long-winded. You guys go ahead and jump in.
Of
Anything
the
you guys want to say
propaganda.
about it?
Do you want to go
Yeah,
ahead
look.
and start this one?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, so the second point you mentioned, the propaganda. I admit, I'm a bit afraid to go into this because the year is against the door. But the first thing you mentioned, sorry, I kind of forgotten what it was. I was going to jump in, but then you mentioned the propaganda. Yeah, you were talking about, right. They give us this false solution. On the one hand, they hate their neighbors and want to liquidate them, and then on the other hand, they'll say, well, we can offer you a peaceful solution, but then you have to live with them. And like you said, that is grotesque. I mean, that just shows that they have no respect for us whatsoever. None. Just none. And also, I wanted to jump in and say that even the Arab nations don't want to take in the Arabs from the Gaza, these 2.5 million people. The Arabs are, I think, there are somewhere between 300 and 400 million, stretching from Morocco in the west all the way to Saudi Arabia and Oman in the east. They are somewhere between 300 and 400 million people. The last time I checked, that was maybe 5 years ago. They reproduce very quickly. Anyway, they could easily take in these 2.5 million people, but they won't. They won't. Even Egypt has shut their border with the Gaza because they don't want these people. Because Hamas, they base their ideology on the Muslim Brotherhood, which Egypt they banned it. The current president, al-Sisi, whatever, he banned the Muslim Brotherhood, and he even executed some of the members in a brutal crackdown of that, fanatical group, Islamist group. And so none of these countries, they don't want these Palestinians. And what should that tell us if these nations don't want them? Even the Saudi Arabians don't want them. Then why would we want them? I mean, these Arabs, they know that these children, like I said, they're 2.5 million. Half of them are children. They've been living under a terrorist regime for 18 years. These children are easily brainwashed. They have had only one narrative beaten into their heads their entire lives, and you bet it involves anti-white propaganda. And they are going to be shipped to the West. And so, yeah, like you said, Gentile, very well put. They hate these people. They don't want to live with them. Even the Arabs don't want to live with them. And they're going to be shipped to our countries. It shows you that they hate us They are anti-white to the core. And I'll hand it over to you, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, all these are good points. And I just wanted to comment on the propaganda that it is very disturbing to watch what happens. I mean, I think that unfortunately the human mind is very susceptible to propaganda, and that's why it's such a well-studied phenomenon and technique. And I think we can observe how even among white American Christians, like, or people who identify as Christian, let's just say, when these things happen in the Middle East and to the Kingdom of Israel, they almost get filled with this bloodlust, and they get really pumped up to see any attacks on the Palestinian groups or the Hamas, and they can't even see how this is just this is not helping them in any way. It's just that they've been kind of inculcated with this idea that one side good, other side bad, and it is really dehumanizing a lot of the times. That one of the talking points is they often say things like, "Oh, there's no such place as Palestine, therefore Palestinians aren't a real people," and they make these weird arguments that they get repeated constantly, and everybody just goes along with this and says it. I mean, and I don't think we need to get into the whole history of Palestine and what constitutes a Palestinian, but because there's sort of like an imprecise thing, like sort of imprecise boundaries around what Palestine is or what a Palestinian is, they just kind of dehumanize people and say, like, oh, you don't deserve a place, you don't deserve any autonomy. But it's interesting that clearly there are people who are willing to fight for that identity, so there must be something real about it, whether it's just a land-based identity or a culturally based identity, I don't know, but it's I think as Christians we shouldn't be like dehumanizing people. We should recognize that God created all the various nations of the earth, and that God created us all with a desire for a certain amount of autonomy or a certain amount of self-determination, let's just say, and so it's just a natural human instinct to desire that and not want to be under the thumb of another group. So again, it's not that I'm taking sides, but recognize where these conflicts come from. It comes from people who aren't satisfied with how their needs for autonomy are being met. So that's, I think, just as Christians and as people who recognize the individuality of nations, we need to, instead of dehumanizing groups, we should be recognizing that there are certain inborn desires that come from God, that he wanted us, that men in particular have the desire to create cultures that reflect their biospirit, that reflect who they are, and to perpetuate those very things. And another thing, I don't know if this is a relevant point, but not all Palestinians are Islamic. Like, there are Christians in Palestine as well. So, like, I actually had a friend in college who was a Palestinian Christian. He was a good guy. So, I mean, I don't, just this idea that like they're all just a bunch of Muslim terrorists is not correct. But, there are, contrary to what some people understand, there are Arabic Christians out there. And again, that doesn't mean they're part of Westernkind. It just means that, I think sometimes the justification for this dehumanization is like, oh, they're Muslims. Muslims are bad. And, people feel, compunctions about, attacking Islam, but not all the Palestinians are Islamic. So that's just another, in some ways it's anti-Christian on a certain level.
Yeah, totally. But I assume he was from the West Bank or Judea, Samaria, whatever.
I couldn't tell you. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, it probably, because Gaza is under. I mean, they are under a naval blockade. Nobody leaves. Nobody goes in. Nobody leaves. And
Yeah. My point was,
I mean, the terrorists in the Gaza,
Right, right.
they murder homosexuals, they murder Christians. But yeah, I was even watching a documentary not too long ago. Didn't finish it, but it talked about Christianity in the Middle East. Just a few decades ago, the Arabs in the Middle East were 25% Christian. Couldn't really believe it. But now they're like below 10%, even closer to 3%. And in Egypt, I think they're about 10%, and it's can't remember what they're called in Egypt, but anyway, it's some congregation, some sect. But never mind.
Coptic
Yeah.
Christians.
Yeah.
In
Oh,
Egypt,
yes,
they're
yes,
called
yes.
Coptic Christians.
Yes, correct. Yes. Yeah, I mean, our Christian brothers in the Middle East are under heavy persecution. And it's not even totally safe to preach Christianity in the kingdom of Judea, but the ears against the door. I mean, yeah, let's just admit it. Christians are under attack, and white Christians are under heavy attack in the West.
Yeah, I really like this swerve, Ian, that, we do have to remember, especially as a Christian podcast, that we do have to talk about the Christian perspective. And what we are seeing whenever these Middle Eastern conflicts pop up is they hammer Christians in the West with these, bullet points and lines and these talking points and this propaganda. And if you guys don't mind, I really would like to talk about some of the things that are not true that the media is pushing on Christians in order to theologically force them into supporting one side or the other of this conflict using, biblical talking points, many of which are incorrect.
Yeah,
And
go
it is
ahead.
important it is important for us as Christians to understand this. So when the Bible talks about Israel or the descendants of Israel, the word Jew or Jewish, um, Yehudi in Hebrew, doesn't appear in the Bible until Second Kings. And this is about 10 or 11 books into the Bible. In First Kings, the kingdom of Israel is split into two nations. One is the house of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judea. Judea and Israel are separated in First Kings in the Old Testament. And in Second Kings, they're specifically differentiated as a people. One as Jews and one as the house of Israel. They're called the house of Israel because they are the 10 other tribes. Now, the way the tribes break down is Benjamin was absorbed into the tribe of Judah. After that woman was raped and they cut her body into pieces and sent it to all of the tribes made war on Benjamin and killed all the males. And the tribe of Judah took all the Benjamin females as brides so that they wouldn't be cut off from the house of Israel. So the tribe of Judah is the tribe of Benjamin, Judah, and some of the Levites being the priestly class. And some of the Levites were in the northern kingdom of Israel. And then the other 10 tribes, the Reubenites, Issachar, all of those other tribes are in the house of Israel. Every time you see the word house of Israel used in prophecy and later in the Bible, it's referring to the northern kingdom. It's not referring to the Jews. Every time after Second Kings, when they're talking about the Jews, they use the word Jew or they use the word kingdom of Judea or Judah or the house of Judah. They always differentiate them. And we as Christians, just because they chose the name Israel for this modern country to put it on a map as that name, doesn't mean that in Revelation, in Corinthians, in Romans, in all these places where prophecy is talked about for the future of Israel, they're talking about the 10 other tribes. They're not talking about Judeans and Jews. That's why there's specifically a book called Hebrews, where the Jews are talked to specifically. And then the house of Israel is referenced in all of the other books as separate. And there's multiple places in the Bible where we can find this. And I'll point it out so people can double check me. I don't want people to just believe me. Look this up for yourselves. It's 1 Kings 11:31 to 35, when the two kingdoms are separated. There's the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom being Judeans. And then in 2 Kings 16:16 is the first time the word Jew or the language Jewish or is used, Yehudim in Hebrew, which is translated to Jewish in the Bible. And every scripture after that, the house of Israel and the house of Judah are referred to separately. So don't let people try to tell you that you have to support politically this country that they call Israel in the modern day, which is made up of the people according to the biblical perspective of the kingdom of Judea. You know, Bible prophecy is not talking about these people. It's talking about other people. Now, we're not going to talk about the identity of those people and where we think they are. That's not the point of this conversation. The point I'm trying to make is that Judaism didn't come into existence until much later in the Bible, when the two kingdoms split up. That's why it's called Judaism. It was the religion of the kingdom of Judea, and they differentiated it after that point. Moses wasn't a Jew. He was a member of the tribe of Levi. So he wasn't even a member of the tribe, but he didn't practice Judaism. It didn't exist yet. Even Judah, the forefather of the tribe of Judah, he didn't practice Judaism, because at that point it was still just the family of Jacob, the family of Israel. Judaism doesn't come into existence until hundreds of years later. Abraham was not a Jew. Isaac wasn't a Jew. Jacob wasn't a Jew. They did not practice Judaism. The worshiping of the one true God in the entire beginning of the Bible has nothing to do with Judaism. Judaism comes into existence later. And Christianity did not come out of Judaism. Even Jesus Christ himself pointed out the errors of rejecting the Messiah and using man's law over God's law and being too legalistic, all of these things that Jesus talked about. You know, Christianity is Jesus directing us back to the worship of the one true God like it was in the beginning of the Bible, not a continuation of Judaism. Judaism has nothing to do with Christianity. It's a completely separate faith, and it's not the faith of Noah or any of the early patriarchs of the Bible. It just isn't. And when these preachers lie to you and they tell you that they are, or they tell you that the descendants of Abraham, you know, own the land of Israel, even Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, who is the father of Arabs, even Arabs will tell you this. Even Jews will tell you this. Ishmael is the father of Arabs, and he's Abraham's first son. So when you try to make the argument that the descendants of Abraham have the right to Israel, what you're basically saying is the whole Middle East has the right to Israel. So you have to be very careful when these preachers try to lie to you and manipulate you and reference the Bible, but they don't reference it correctly. Don't let these religious theological arguments sway you into supporting a political conflict in the modern day just because Judeans chose the name Israel to put it on a map to confuse you into thinking that that's what prophecy is talking about, because it isn't. And again, guys, I'm sorry, that was long-winded. I'll pass it back to you, but I just wanted to cover that because we're seeing so much, you know, Christian antagonistic propaganda in the United States, and I'm sure in other countries as well, where they're basically telling us if you're really a Christian, you've got to pick this one side of the conflict. And I would really like to cover that for the listeners.
Yeah, well said. I could give the audience a little backstory here too. Reuben, if we go to First Chronicles 5:3, it reads, well, I'm just going to start from verse 1. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, but the birthright was Joseph's. So the birthright, and thus the promise, is Joseph's. And now I'm going to take you to Genesis 48, verse 17. And when Joseph saw that his father, Jacob, laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He shall become a people. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And so this is a very tiny detail. Ephraim, the younger son of Joseph, is put above Manasseh. And Ephraim actually contains the promise of the name Israel, Jacob Israel. And Ephraim was one of the 10 tribes in the north in the kingdom of Israel, and then they were taken to Assyria. And so the promise was pretty much lost. And then the priesthood, because Reuben defiled his father's bed, he slept with one of his wives, can't remember the name of her, but then he lost the promise, the birthright, he lost the right to royalty, and he lost the right to priesthood. So the priesthood went to Levi, the royalty to Judah, and the promise went to Ephraim, the birthright to Ephraim. And this is all important. But Jesus, the salvation is of the Jews. That means salvation is through the bloodline of Judah. So Jesus is born, and he actually inherits the royalty, the eternal priesthood, and the promise. The promise is through him. And then it goes into Hebrews, the epistle to the Hebrews, and I'm diving into giving you a deep dive here, but in just to give you the final result, Jesus wins. Amen. So Jesus, he inherits all of these three things, and this is even when you go when you read must be in Luke, when these wise men from the east, they come to Jesus, they give him the gifts, the gold, the myrrh, and oh goodness, what was it? The frankincense. So it actually represents, it's a symbolism for royalty, priesthood, and the promise, in my opinion. But yeah, so in the end, Jesus wins, and he ties it all together. He corrects all of the mistakes made. Yeah, it's beautiful. But in the end, Jesus is king, and he wins. Amen.
Amen. No, and it's very well put. Like I said, it really shows the intricacy that you have to, pay attention to these terms and understand who you're talking about. And to offer even further proof, I'll give more scriptures for people to look up. Jeremiah 11. If you look up Jeremiah, the book, and chapter 11, all throughout there, almost every verse refers to the house of Israel and the house of Judah separately, that entire book. And then also let me pull it up here. In 2 Kings 17, that whole chapter talks about the separation of the two kingdoms. So those are two whole chapters that you can read, and it really lays out the different people that you're talking about when you're referring to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So in the Christian mind, even though on a map it says Israel, you're not talking about the house of Israel or the kingdom of Israel in the present day. And yeah, bringing it all back around. So what is it that we're saying here? We're not saying to support Palestine and Hamas and that terrorist attacks are good. We're not saying that. We don't agree with that. Obviously, as people of Westernkind, as Christians, we don't support a lot of what goes on in the Middle East. A lot of how they handle their conflicts, a lot of how they deal with each other is completely against our biospirit. And they have a different biospirit from us, and they handle their conflicts a certain way. And we don't support, those methods. But the other thing we're also saying is don't just then support the other side and say, oh, yeah, these people should be annihilated. And if they're not going to be annihilated, they have to come to the West. Both of those options are bad. And it's anti-white to support either one, because both of them will lead to white victimization, further pushing of the anti-white narrative, and it will further break down Western countries. Neither of those should be accepted. Even something as simple as a third option of, why don't the occupants of Gaza get moved to the West Bank so they can live with other Palestinians? And then there isn't this little 20-mile by 5-mile pocket of people that are antithetical to Israel, the country of Israel, on this map, but they're at least living with other Palestinians, and they simply give the West Bank an extra chunk of 20 miles by 5 miles. So the exact same amount of space that they're living in now, they could live in next to other Palestinians. Why is this not an option? Why is it all of these media, college-educated, super big brain, smart people trust the science knuckleheads not able to come up with a solution that simple and simply move them 100 miles in one direction versus bringing them across the ocean to other nations? It doesn't make sense. And it really shows you that they have an outcome in mind, and they're forcing you to accept that outcome through any means necessary. And you have to reject both outcomes. Supporting terrorism and supporting Palestine, saying, oh, yeah, they should kill the Jews, that's bad. But then saying that Israel should either blow them up or send them to the West, that is also equally bad. Both of them are bad. And as Christians, we should reject them both and offer a third option.
Amen. Amen. This has been a fantastic show, just fantastic. And I thank you all for listening. Thank you, Gentile and Ian, for joining. And God bless you all who are listening. Take care. See you next time.
God
See you next
bless.
time, everyone.